This is exactly what I'm talking about, right? When you want to build a story and you want to create mass hysteria, it does not matter if your numbers are right. And we are seeing exactly that right here in Kansas City. Good morning. It's 6:05. It's great to have you here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We are starting the week, 50 degrees warmer than we did most of last week. It's 41 degrees right now. It was -5, give or take, last Monday. So things are off to a great start, man. Mark's feeling good about life, and everything's good.
I'm going hoodie and shorts today.
Oh, man, that's bold. That's bold, man. I like it, though. So I'm sitting here, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, beautiful weekend across Kansas City. Winter might be over, but I can't get over the fact that the way this IRS layoff story was portrayed by Kansas City media and national media as well was so unfair and was so disingenuous. And over the weekend, I got this on X. Somebody DM'd me this clip from CNN. I guess it was from, I think, Thursday or Friday night. And I admit, CNN, Thursday, Friday night, I try to watch a little bit early in the week. But my heart doctor told me to stop watching it late in the week because by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I just can't take any more of it. So I got to kind of calm on watching CNN. MSNBC, forget it. Doc said don't do it. You can't do it. But CNN, I give it a shot once in a while. But I missed this clip last week where they talked about, the IRS layoffs in Kansas City courtesy of DOGE. And they brought up the fact that the number was 30,000 layoffs here in Kansas City. I kid you not. Now, we have about 30,000 federal employees in Kansas City, but somebody at CNN clearly got their numbers wrong.
We don't know. I'm talking about when the rubber meets the road. I'm talking about, for example, Kansas City, 30,000 government employees might be laid off. It will destroy the economy of Kansas City. That's okay.
Why do you say that?
Because I'm reading what the individuals from Kansas City have been saying, that they're very concerned.
What do you think they're going to say when they're going to get whacked?
Of course they're going to say that. But my point is, do we think that's smart to live in an American city just go under?
How many American cities need a massively oversized federal government to stay afloat? I mean, isn't that said more about the city than the government?
But when did we get to the point where...
So that was Mr. Wonderful and Scott Jennings pushing back on the assertion that Kansas City will go under, losing 30,000 federal jobs. But of course, the main point that was being made there was that Kansas City was going to lose 30,000 IRS jobs. We don't have 30,000 IRS jobs here. We have 30,000 federal employees, give or take. Might be 35 or 40, depending on who you ask. But it's right around the 30 number. But this is where you create mass hysteria. People don't understand and don't have the facts. They go on CNN. They're like, 30,000 people in Kansas City are getting blown out from the IRS. It's like, if you lived here or spent 5 minutes here, you would understand that would be such an astronomical number of people to exclusively be working for the IRS. And what did the number end up being? John shared it on a news report.
116 was the report on Friday.
116. So this is how this works. You throw a big number against the wall, the big scary number. 30,000 people in Kansas City getting blown out. Oh, my gosh, what are we going to do? How's the city going to survive? Then, as the week rolls along, we find out it's maybe the reports were up to 1,000 IRS workers in Kansas City were expected to get laid off. And then as John reports on Friday on the news, the real number is, 116.
You'll recall we started out with the potential of 1,000 people losing their jobs at the IRS. It was like, no, wait a minute. Not here in Kansas City exclusively.
Yeah. Yep. So they were only off on CNN by about, 29,884, give or take? Yep, pretty close. Closer than CNN is on most things, I guess.
Fake news.
I'm just throwing it out there. Do with the information what you want. But this is how a story continues to unfold with completely disingenuous narratives and just incorrect information. So then over the weekend on the national front, this is like the big thing right now. Go after Elon, go after DOGE, go after Trump through how could you possibly fire a federal employee? I really think you're out of touch if you think this is going to work. If you believe that everyday Americans in the private sector are right now losing sleep over nameless, faceless federal employees potentially losing their jobs as part of a bloated bureaucracy that exists in our federal government, you are woefully out of touch. I'm not sitting here saying anybody wants to see anyone else lose their job. I don't. I mean, I've said that last week, all week long. I'm not like celebrating anybody getting fired because I don't know who's a good employee. I don't know who's a bad employee. I don't know. I do know this much. I do know a little bit of math. Like I have a little bit of math skills here to figure out that we're $36 trillion in debt. We're running a $2 trillion annual deficit, and we just can't keep this thing going. It is not sustainable. And for 3 decades now, Democrats and Republicans, both parties, to be very clear, have not had the backbone and have not had the gumption to do right by their taxpayer and do right by their country. Because they've been far too worried about their own political powers, their own political futures, and potentially the money on their end. So that's why nothing has happened. So Trump comes in, and yes, some of this is obviously being challenged in the courts. We do want Congress to play a role in this. They have to play a role in this at some point. But there also are powers that Donald Trump, Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, and the rest of the administration believe they can take through executive powers. And they're obviously doing that right now. And that's what they have to do to try to get this thing somewhat under control. But I'm telling you, if it's really to you going to be all about, oh my goodness, we have to feel bad for every government employee who gets let go, I promise you it's not going to fly. Whether it's here in Kansas City or anywhere else, it's not going to be the thing that regular people connect with. Because guess what? They see layoffs all the time. I see layoffs all the time. You see layoffs all the time. And they're done because businesses have to make difficult decisions, not because people want them to happen. And if there's ever a time when a group of people need to make difficult decisions, it's our federal government right now. That's how normal people in this country live every single day. From small business owners to those who run restaurants, who are managers, to those who run major corporations here in town. We all deal with it. So the whole sky is falling. Oh, my gosh, we can't believe the government's firing people. You're missing the boat. 913-408-7957. Let's squeeze in Mike in Kansas City. What's up, buddy? Happy Monday. Go ahead.
Hi. Every time I hear this, it irritates the heck out of me. Within minutes of Biden taking the presidency, he immediately put 60,000 energy workers unemployed when he canceled the pipeline. And I think I read somewhere where the entire presidency, over 1 million energy workers and related fields were put out of work. And let's not even talk about all the millions that suffered under the COVID nonsense that was going on. So when I hear them talk about 150 workers that really don't produce anything, you know, like energy, it irritates the heck out of me, the hypocrisy of the media and the news and essentially the woke movement in general. So, you know, I feel bad for anybody that's out of work, but let's not forget that, you know, the prior people put millions out of work and they didn't care.
Yeah,
the media, that is.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, listen, they were cheering on when Biden was firing people from the military for not getting a COVID shot. Let's not forget that. Now, I'm not cheering on these people getting laid off because of who they are. Like, many of them are just wrong place, wrong time. You feel bad for them as a fellow human being, as a fellow American. I feel bad for any decent person who loses their job. But my goodness, you know how many people I've seen lose their job in this industry who are just hardworking, decent people? All the time. All the time I've seen it. And I'll tell you right now, nobody's doing stories about it in local news. National news is not covering it, of course. So that's where you have to then say to yourself, okay, it sucks. But is it the thing that is going to draw an incredible amount of uproar and outrage from regular voters. And unless you're in that Washington, D.C. bubble, I really don't think it is. 913-4087-957. As we roll through the first hour, 6 o'clock hour on KCMO Talk Radio, I will get also the reaction to this from you and your calls to kick it off on a Monday. Plus, Kansas Congresswoman Sharice Davids has reacted to DOGE. She had something to say over the weekend. We'll share that with you coming up on 95.7 FM. 6:20 on a Monday. Beautiful, balmy, 41-degree Monday across Kansas City after last week. My gosh, I want to run around in a Speedo outside. It's great. But after last week's chill, we have a beautiful week on tap. Now, I think we also have a pretty beautiful thing transpiring for the nation because we finally have people who realize that we have bloated bureaucracies that need to be cut down. And it doesn't mean you're anti-American government worker. It doesn't mean you're anti-American or anything like that. It just means you realize the math doesn't work anymore. And that's where we are at. The math does not work anymore. And it hasn't worked for years with a $2 trillion annual deficit. So with DOGE being obviously the headline in the nation, and here in Kansas City, where on Friday, 116 IRS workers were laid off from the IRS building, and that's actually Kansas City and Lee Summit. Let go. Sharice Davids, Kansas Congresswoman, 3rd District, of course. She was on Fox 4's For the People with our buddy John Holt. And here's what Sharice Davids had to say about DOGE.
How do you find that middle ground in what Elon Musk is trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there that at the end of the day, I do think that on both sides of the aisle, and certainly from my perspective, addressing issues of fraud, addressing issues of waste, and trying to improve federal efficiency is a huge priority.
Stop. How can Sharice Davids say this with a straight face? She's been there since 2018, and we've racked up trillions of dollars in debt. There's no evidence to suggest she has done anything to try to improve the situation. And now she's like, yeah, waste, fraud, that's a huge deal.
How dare you?
Please, spare me. I might have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. Who's buying that? I would say that if she was a Republican, then there's plenty of Republicans out there right now who are like cheering on Elon Musk, who also have voted for awful spending bills over the last several years. So I don't want to hear from them either. But Sharice Davids is obviously in our backyard. She's my congresswoman. She's many of your, same for you. She's your congressperson in many cases.
And for this, and particularly USAID, I think that we're probably talking about disagreements in how we get there. I can tell you that because USAID is an agency that makes use of and helps Kansas farmers get the food that they grow, not just to feed us here at home, but to feed people internationally, that the approach that we have seen around USAID right now is just not a responsible way to get to more efficient and effective program, whether it's USAID or some of the other areas that we're seeing this.
Anyone clear on what any of that means? I didn't think so. I do not understand what any of that means. It was a lot of nothing from Kansas Congresswoman Sharice Davids. And that's what we've gotten from politicians by and large for far too long. A lot of nothing, a lot of noise, a lot of hot air. And that's how you end up in a country that sits here at $36 trillion in debt, needing to do something to get this under control. And there's also this mentality of, we've got to go line item by line item, agency by agency. Sometimes big companies do this. They just do last in, first out. If you've been hired in the last 6 to 12 months or whatever their time frame is, you're out. Because we got to shrink this thing, and we've got to do it as soon as possible. Ron's in Bayshore. What's up, Ron? You're on KCMO.
Hey, Pete. About 10 years ago, my daughter was a December grad out of Northwest, up in Maryville, and she was having trouble finding a job. So she heard the advertisement that the IRS does every winter when they're looking for part-time data entry folks. So she went down and applied and took a skills test. They give them a skills test to make sure they know what a keyboard is. And she breezed through that thing. They gave them 30 minutes to finish the test, and she finished in about 8 minutes. And as she was getting up, she noticed that they had a couple people in there that were helping the other folks that were in the class taking the test. And most of the people that were taking the test were African American. And so she breezed through the test. She's a really fast typist. And she never got a call back.
Maybe she should have worn her Justin Trudeau blackface. I don't know what to tell you, man.
Yeah. A few months later, then Emanuel Cleaver was on the news, and they were talking about, they every few years they're talking about moving the IRS over to Johnson County, and he was like, "No, we can't move it because those are black jobs."
They're just IRS jobs. What is a black job? I'm asking this.
Have a good day.
I'm asking this, of course, rhetorically, but it's like, what is? It's just absurd. There's plenty of white people down at the IRS. There's plenty of black people. There's Asians. There's Latinos. It's like, what does any of this mean? Just hire good, competent people of all, backgrounds and diversity, and make sure you get the best people in there. And guess what? You'll have a pretty good operation. That's it. That's all there is to it. I don't know why Ron's daughter didn't get the job. All right? No one really knows. Maybe she wasn't as good as Ron thought she was. We've all been there, right? Let's be honest. Hey, my kid's the best. Well, not quite. I'm not saying that to you, Ron. I'm just saying we've all been there and seen those kind of parents as well. So I don't know. But none of this, absolutely none of this, when it comes to shrinking the federal government, should be or is about anyone's race. My goodness, it's about math. That's what it's about. Math first and foremost. Dave in Overland Park, real quick. Dave, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, when I look at Sharice Davids and Elon Musk, and they're about the same age, and see all the things that Musk has accomplished, I think I trust him more than Sharice. And when he tells the American people, unless we get the bloated government under control, you will not have Social Security, you will not have federal workers' retirement. It won't be there. We'll spend it all on the national debt interest. People better listen. That's their retirement. They're going to lose it someday, mathematically speaking. An economist can prove you cannot do this stuff forever. It's got to change. I don't know why the Democrats are standing in the way when Elon Musk is trying to save their retirement.
And thank you, Dave. And what they also should realize is let's come to the table. Let's say, okay, admitting to the government waste is actually a good thing, and try to actually look like you're finding that middle ground. I think that would be a huge win right now, a huge win for the Democratic Party. Can't wait for Keatsman coming up at 10 on KCMO. And then, of course, Dan Bongino at 11 o'clock, as you have heard. Maybe you haven't, but it was just on the news. Dan Bongino has been named as Donald Trump's deputy FBI director. His last show will be in the middle of March. And what that means for KCMO Talk Radio right now, well, I do not have the answer. So don't call up John. Don't call up Mark and become and play program director. We'll figure it out. And as soon as we know, you will know. I promise.
30 minutes after Trump made the announcement, we have somebody on Twitter. Who's filling his time slot?
It's like fantasy sports, so.
Yeah.
What is it? Come on. Put Keatsman on till 5. No, I don't think Kevin will be on till 5.
No, Kevin loves what he's doing, man. He's getting his jollies, and we love having him.
Mm-hmm.
But trust me, Kevin's in a good spot right now. As soon as we figure something out, you will be the first to know. All right? But yes, it does become like fantasy football. Everyone's got the answer on who needs to be the Dan Bongino replacement. And don't worry, we're working on it. My phone's been blowing up for the last 10 hours. And let's just put it this way. I trust the people who will make the decision, yours truly included. Now, in the meantime, back here in Kansas City, this story will probably have a bow on it this week. Maybe it won't. I don't know. This story has taken a lot of twists and turns. But the story of Ralph Yarl the young man who was shot by Andrew Lester April of 2023 when Jarl showed up to the wrong home to pick up his brothers. And Andrew Lester, 84-year-old man, living by himself, shot Ralph Jarl. Amazingly, Ralph Jarl was not killed. Thank goodness. He's now in college. He's doing great. He seems like a stand-up young man. But, of course, the racial components of this story made it a national story. Ralph Jarl was a black teenager, is a black teenager, and Andrew Lester was an 80-something-year-old white man. Andrew Lester died last week, and he died days after he pled guilty to the charges the Friday prior. So it was about 10 days ago that he pled guilty to second-degree assault, and within less than a week, he was dead. And we talked about how last week the Jarl family put out a statement, and the statement to me was putting and fanning the flames unnecessarily for a man who's now dead. Their family statement read, in part, that they supported the speedy trial to ensure the public would see that our society does not condone shooting an unarmed innocent child simply for ringing the wrong doorbell, especially when that child was targeted because of the color of his skin. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that Andrew Lester shot Ralph Jarl because of the color of his skin. The prosecutor's office would not introduce any racial evidence because none existed. Now, they can believe whatever they want to believe, but those aren't facts of the case. Now, we know this became a national and, frankly, worldwide story because of the racial components. I mean, gosh, people are shot every day in this town. And, by the way, we've dealt with record homicides in Kansas City over the last few years. None of these stories got the national attention outside of the Super Bowl shooting that the Ralph Jarl shooting got, and Ralph Jarl, thank goodness, survived by the grace of God. So ask yourself why that is. You know the answer, and I know the answer. Because the media loves adding a racial component to anything. I don't know what's in Andrew Lester's heart. I don't know if the man's a racist. He might have been a racist. It's possible. I can't say with certainty he's not a racist. But what I can say is that when it comes to the facts of the case, which is all any of us can follow unless we know what is in Andrew Lester's heart, you can't call this a racially motivated shooting when Ralph Jarl showed up at the guy's door and, you know, it's late at night. He doesn't know the person. He opens it up. The person apparently is trying to enter the house, and he shoots him. Now, there's dispute as to what exactly happened at the front door, but we'll never know if Andrew Lester would have also pulled his gun and fired at Ralph Jarl if Ralph Jarl was white. It's an impossible question to answer. But you have a Jarl family that has raised $3.5 million on a GoFundMe, in part because of the national headlines this got because of the racial components. So they're not going to give up now. But I think it's wrong to insinuate a man is a racist the day that he dies when there was no evidence to suggest that he was a racist. And Ralph Jarl's mother sat down with Fox 4 here in Kansas City over the weekend for the For the People show with John Holt and basically doubled down on that.
The mother of the honors student and all-state-based clarinet player believes in her heart the reason for the shooting is clear as day.
Open your eyes. I believe that's the reason why this happened to Ralph, so that you can see that it has nothing to do with where you live, how you talk, what schools you send your kids to. The struggle belongs to all of us, and we all have to fight for where we need to be in this country.
That was Ralph Jarl's mother to Fox 4 here in Kansas City. I know the family's been through a lot. I have empathy for what the family has been through, almost losing a son. But when you hire hucksters like Benjamin Crump and you raise $3.5 million through a GoFundMe, and you keep up the notion that Andrew Lester was nothing but an old white racist, and then after the guy's dead, you go on television and say, open up your eyes. We all know why this happened. Well, my eyes are opened, and my eyes are open to the actual facts presented in the case. And that does not exist. Now, if you want me to open up my eyes to the bias that you wish for me to see to further a narrative that has made a family very wealthy, I'll open my eyes to that. My eyes are wide open to that. They are as wide open as they can possibly be. But it's amazing that local media has allowed the narrative to continue on, despite the fact that they should know, and they do know, they just don't want to admit it or don't want to say the obvious part out loud, that there was no evidence to suggest that race was a motivating factor here. You can want something to be true, but in the end, you got to prove it. And at no point was it ever proven. And the other complaint from the Yarl family and the mother was that the prosecutor, Zachary Thompson, who we've invited on the show this week on KCMO, and hopefully he will come on the show, apparently he wasn't passionate enough about the case. Also something that, well, you can't really prove.
A mom frustrated not only with the actions of the man who shot her son, but a system and a prosecutor she believed was unequipped to handle the gravity of this case.
I always tell my sister, right? I'm like, I feel like we got the short end of the stick. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, Lester, the defendant, got to pick his lawyer. And we got handed the persecutor. When you do not believe something inside of your belly, inside of your gut, you don't fight for it the way you're supposed to fight for it. There's no passion in it.
Once again, you can't disprove that. So the Yarl family is now accusing Andrew Lester, who's now dead, of being a racist. The man is not even alive to defend himself anymore. And it's impossible to prove that you're not a racist, right? Someone calls you a racist. It's like, how do you prove you're not one? Well, I treat people really well. I treat people equally. Racist. Like, you can't. How do you disprove it? Same thing here. Now they say that Zachary Thompson, the Clay County prosecutor, didn't have the passion in his belly for the case. How does he prove otherwise? He filed the charges that he can file, that he felt his office could file in this case, and he got a guilty plea out of Andrew Lester for second-degree assault, which is believed to be the best he could do in this case, since, thank goodness, Ralph Yarl's alive. So how does Zachary Thompson prove that he has passion for this case? He did it by the book. He filed charges. He got a guilty plea. And it took under 2 years, which in today's legal system is like not that slow. It's actually pretty good. Ralph Yarl seems like a really good young man. I don't know him, just like I don't know and did not know Andrew Lester. He seems like a good young man. He apparently wants to be in the Air Force. He's down in college in Texas, and God bless him for that. But I'll tell you right now, I mean, some of these people around him, it is embarrassing what they have tried to do to other people without any facts to back it up, including Clay County prosecutor Zachary Thompson, who has a very good track record and who is well respected in this community in Clay County. And this is the kind of nonsense he has to deal with on the back end after getting a guilty plea in this case. Sometimes you just got to fake that outrage and then hope the media will carry your water. Good morning, 7:05. Happy Monday. Glad you're here on 95.7 FM KCMO. So, DOGE has everybody up in arms. It has been the story to follow over the last couple of weeks, right? And now you may have seen this headline over the weekend. There were protests at various Congress people's town halls over the last couple of days. It got a lot of attention that Republicans were dealing with protests at their town halls around the country. Now, I didn't see anything here in Kansas City. There have not been reports on any of the Republicans in the Kansas City area dealing with this, Derek Schmidt or Sam Graves or Mark Alford. Heck, Mark Alford was in studio on Thursday, and he said nothing had happened on his end yet. But there are certain people who have been targeted, politically, of course, for these town halls. And some of those names include various congressmen and women on the East Coast, Rich McCormick in Georgia, suburban districts, Stephanie Bice in Oklahoma, Kevin Calvert in California, Scott Perry in Pennsylvania, Tom Keene in New Jersey, Mike Lawler in New York. And the main point of this is to drum up enthusiasm that makes it appear like these Republicans are getting pushback from their own voters in their own districts for what DOGE is doing and trying to shrink the government. And as it turns out, at least in some of these cases, a lot of these protesters are people that do not even live in the district. This is from my buddy Eric Erickson. He works down in Atlanta, Georgia. He's got a nationally syndicated show. And he wrote here over the weekend that in the case of Rich McCormick, a congressman in Georgia, he got ambushed by a hostile crowd that lashed out at him over government cuts. It made headlines nationally and remained the top story at the Drudge Report for about 48 hours. It came after weeks of Democrats urging activists to stand up, take action, and fight. The town hall was held in Atlanta suburbs at its south end, which is also where the bulk of Democrats in the district live. However, many of the people who were at the town hall were not actually voters within the district, according to the congressman's staff. The press has ignored that little detail. These were people who lived in the adjoining Democratic district and were people who had not voted for Donald Trump in 2024. But then the media runs with this, Republicans get blowback at town hall headline. Drudge, of course, had it because Drudge, I don't know what happened to Drudge, but he went off the deep end.
He's a nut job.
I don't know if it's Drudge himself or somebody else now running that operation, but it's a shell of what it used to be. And it's not a coincidence that this is happening, because you have to sometimes manufacture this enthusiasm to try to prove a further point. We saw it in 2020. We were told for months in 2020 you can't go see your grandma dying in the hospital. But then, hey, you got to have protests for racial justice, and COVID magically doesn't spread because COVID is woke too, you see? So COVID won't spread when there's thousands of people marching in the streets, but you can't go say goodbye to your dying mother or your dying grandmother in the hospital because that wouldn't be so good now, would it? So now this is where this is going to trend. And this is how it oftentimes will work. You get these fake, outrageous town halls that will take place. The media then will report on these town halls as if it's all like Donald Trump voters now all of a sudden really upset with Elon and Trump and DOGE. And then the media will further this narrative to try to convince people that they also should be upset and they also should be against what DOGE is trying to accomplish. And the key is to not fall for it. That's the key. The key is to not fall for it. We talked a lot about this last week with the IRS jobs, right? You had these IRS jobs that there was mass hysteria about in Kansas City. Up to 1,000 people were going to lose their jobs in Kansas City at the IRS. The number came out to be 116, at least for now. Maybe it gets to 1,000, but for now it's 116. And the media covered this story, 116 people losing their jobs, more than I've seen them cover any job loss story. Heck, remember what happened to those jobs up at Clay Como, the Ford plant? There were like 300 and some odd people let go a couple of years ago. That was nothing when it comes to media coverage compared to what we saw at the end of last week with these IRS deal. With these jobs at the IRS where, it was about 100 people who were let go. So ask yourself why. It's about furthering a narrative. It's about setting the tone for where they want the conversation to go. And the key is to realize that it's all part of a broader plan. That's what it's really about. And Republicans need to realize what's going on here, and they can't get weak-kneed on this stuff. And gosh, I would love it if Democrats came along for the ride. I would love it that instead of playing resistance, come to Trump and say, you know what? We'll work with you on this. And then you can actually look like you're at the table, you're working in good faith to try to get rid of waste and fraud and abuse with the federal government. understanding the math of being $2 trillion annually in debt, $36 trillion in total debt, and look like, hey, we're coming back to the middle here. That would be the smart play right now for the Democratic Party. But instead, it's just resist, resist, resist. And anybody who works for the government is somehow the sainted employee that could never lose their job. And that's just not the real world. Rick in Leavenworth, go ahead. You're on KCMO.
Yeah, so I have a couple bitches here. First one is, let's just let you know up front, I voted for Trump 3 times. I am pretty conservative. I spent 41 years in the Army. I have a couple injuries or scars to prove my loyalty to the Constitution. I do not like what the president did with this send out, and you have to prove how much you work or whatever. I think that is against the law, first of all, because it Statute 42 against intimidation and coercion and all that. Because basically, if you said, "Hey, just send this to us and tell us what you did," without the threat of you're going to lose your job because we'll just consider you resigned, I might have been okay with it. But that right there put me over the edge. The other thing that put me over the edge, because I'm an American, I'm not I don't live in England, is when the president said, "Long live the king." He may have been joking, but these things we don't joke about. We are a republic. He needs to ratchet himself back. I love him, and I understand what he's doing precisely, but I think that is going too far. That's hateful to real Americans, and that's hateful to America. We are not a monarchy, and he needs to probably say, "Hey, I apologize for that." That's what I would look for. And I'm telling you, I don't care about him. I care about the Constitution, and people need to probably look beyond him and to the Constitution, because what he did in saying that he was, long live the king, was hateful.
All right, Rick, thank you. I appreciate the service, man. I'll say this about both of your points. One, the email that was apparently sent out over the weekend, directed by Elon to federal employees to say, hey, give me 5 things you did last week. I believe that they've got to be careful with stuff like that. For some of the reasons that you mentioned, now it's interesting, like the Department of Defense, headed by Pete Hegseth, told people apparently to not respond to the email. There's been reporting that suggests Elon did that to try to find out who the good employees are to give them potential promotions. There's also a belief that because there are a lot of people on the government workforce who aren't doing anything, it was a way to figure out who actually is working versus who is collecting a paycheck. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I agree of all the things that DOGE has done. That email over the weekend, which we'll get more into this morning, is something that you got to walk a fine line with. The second part, Donald Trump's "Long live the king" tweet or truth post. The best thing that Trump has going for him right now is that he's on Truth Social, and frankly, no one else is. Let's be honest. You only see Trump's Truth Socials when they get shared to X or Facebook or Instagram. No one's on Truth Social. The greatest thing I have done during the first month of Donald Trump's administration is try to avoid his social media. Because, and I say this with all due respect, while there can be important announcements on there, like finding out Dan Bongino's not going to be doing a radio show anymore last night, a lot of it is just noise. A lot of it is just oftentimes bluster. A lot of it is, yes, trolling. To be fair, if Biden put that post up about "Long live the king," yeah, I'm pretty sure we all would be pretty annoyed by that. I think you're right about that, Rick. I think that's a fair criticism to have. But if there's one thing we've learned about Trump through 8 years now of following this guy and the second term of him being in the White House, it's oftentimes best to take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally. And that, when it comes to his social media posts, when it comes to his press conferences, that's oftentimes what the media misses. They don't take him seriously, but they take him literally. I continue to, with all due respect to him in the office, not take him literally, but take him seriously. You know I'm a fan of DOGE and what they are attempting to do, which is something that Republicans and Democrats haven't had the gumption, haven't had the stones to do for 30 years now. And that is stop spending more money than we're bringing into the federal government. And the only way to do it is to cut spending. It's not about raising taxes on the rich and all these other nonsensical ideas that you hear from people. The government is bringing in more revenues than it ever has in history. In fact, after the Donald Trump tax cuts from 2017 that we were told was going to lead to the rich just getting richer, 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 and that was going to be what it was all about, the government made more money in revenues in the wake of those tax cuts, which we were told was impossible because the rich guy and the rich gal were the only ones getting the breaks. We don't have a revenue problem in the country. We have a spending problem. If there's one big mistake from Donald Trump's first term, it's blowing out the budget in 2020 in the wake of COVID. And yes, there were some initial things that had to happen. I understand that in the early parts of COVID to make sure that the economy didn't fully collapse. But there was way too much government spending over the last 6 months of that year when, frankly, things should have been back to normal by midsummer at the absolute latest. And then what happened is Biden just put gasoline on the fire. And they basically kept the spending levels where they were during that 2020 COVID year. So that's why you went from deficits that were around $1 trillion to suddenly $2 trillion annual deficits. And Biden would barely cut the deficit, and it would be like, I'm cutting the deficit. Donald Trump never did that. Well, yes, Trump did have a really bad budget deficit his last year because of COVID. And Biden would barely cut it from where Trump had it during COVID and act like he's cutting the budget from where Trump had it. But it was all a ruse, right? He didn't bring it back to where it should have been pre-COVID. He just barely cut it from where it was that final year during COVID and then acted like he was some kind of budget hawk, which is comical.
Come on, man.
You know it, Joe. You know it and I know it. So now we're in this place where DOGE is doing what the hard work that has to be done. But I do not understand the approach from Elon Musk over the weekend. And this, of course, caused a lot of hay Friday into Saturday, where Elon said that blanket emails sent to federal employees asking for a response about their weekly accomplishments or risk termination was a test to see if they had a pulse. So Elon, of course, is running DOGE. He wrote on Friday, all government staff would receive an email requesting specifics of what they had achieved last week. And I had listeners reach out to us who work for the government who got the email. And they were told by their managers to basically not respond. Even the Department of Defense, run by Pete Hegseth, put out a statement saying don't respond to the email. So now Elon, in an early morning post this morning, said basically that this was more or less a check to see if employees had a pulse and if they were capable of replying to an email. He added, this mess will get sorted out this week. A lot of people in for a rude awakening and a strong dose of reality. They don't get it yet, but they will. It's not that I'm against the idea of proving to your boss what you do around here. I'm not against that at all. I think that's a fine conversation to have and a fine request of any employee. But the notion that somehow DOGE was going to sort through 2 million emails from people on what they did for the last week and then figure out who was worth a damn and who wasn't based on those responses. I mean, come on. We all say we want the private sector or we want the public sector to operate more like the private sector. If a private sector employer did that, you'd be like, well, this is not a realistic way to go about figuring out who's worth something and who's not. And there's no way to go through all these emails anyway. So what's the point? All you did with the email stunt is give the media something to, freak out about. Now, I do believe the media is overplaying its hand here. I don't think for a second they're going to get the sympathy from regular people in the private sector who have been a part of layoffs, who have seen layoffs, who have seen budget cuts in recent years, who, do not have the household income or the spending power they had just a few years ago. They're overplaying their hand on simping for the government worker. That's a fact. But don't give them any free ammunition when you don't have to. You're doing radical things that need to be done on behalf of the American taxpayer. But one of the reasons I want Elon helping out Trump is because Elon's supposed to be the guy that for all of Trump's bluster, Elon's the guy who's going to be targeted with his team and who's going to make this as simple and seamless a process as possible. And when that news came out Friday into Saturday, it was like, okay, when I've got people who are Trump supporters in Kansas City being like, I got the email, this doesn't really make sense, people are trying to figure this whole deal out, then you've kind of lost a couple of people, and you don't want to lose people. You got to keep the average person on your side, and I think they still do have that. But just don't have some of these missteps that have taken place because the media is dying to latch on to something here. I mean, they are grasping at straws. Don't give them one to hang on to. All right. If the people want the story, I'll give it to them here in the final hour on KCMO. How did I end up in a dorm room at 19 years old with Haley Joel Osment? Well, I was visiting a friend at NYU, New York University. Actually, I guess I would have been 18. It was freshman year. Went up there and paid a visit. And he had happened to be in the same dorm room as Haley Joel Osment, who, this would have been, 19 years ago now. Starting to feel old, John.
There you go.
Not quite 65, but I'm like, wait, that was 19 years ago?
See how vivid it is in your mind?
I'm scratching my head, and I'm like, what did I have for dinner on Friday? God, you are rubbing off on me, John. This is not good. And, of course, at that point, his claim to fame, his biggest moment was still The Sixth Sense, where he famously said, I see dead people. So, we're talking about it, and we're like, hey, we're all going to hang out later, and he's there, and, I'm somebody who, I'll have a drink here and there. I'll have a couple of drinks here and there. But these individuals, it's downtown Manhattan. It's college kids. They like to have fun in a different way. I'll just leave it at that.
Call the guy on the bike.
Yeah.
Messenger drops by.
Exactly. So, they're doing their thing. They're smoking a little pot, the whole deal. And as someone who really could probably count it on one hand in my entire life, I'm like, all right, whatever. Try it out. And it was fine. It's just, when you don't do anything, it's kind of just different, right? So then apparently I spent 45 minutes talking to Haley Joel Osment and getting a blow-by-blow on the filming of The Sixth Sense. And all I remember him telling me is that Bruce Willis is a good guy. Of all the time I spent talking to him on the breakdown of The Sixth Sense, the lasting memory is him talking about what a great guy Bruce Willis is. So take that and do with it what you want. But I guess Bruce Willis is a good guy, and that's my interaction with Haley Joel Osment. And I have no idea what he is doing these days. Not a clue.
I think he's just a producer now, because I think the last time he was in a big movie was probably The Sixth Sense.
I know he was there at their NYU school, their film school. They have a very good film school there, as you can imagine. Yep. So he was there for that. So I don't know. Hopefully he did something with it. But, gosh, we're the same age. He'll be 37 here in a few weeks. And I'm sure he remembers our conversation just as well as I do. Oh, man. Well, speaking of conversations, this one was over the weekend. It was on CNN, and it was a CNN panelist claiming that Kansas City is about to lay off 30,000 people in the federal workforce courtesy of DOGE, which goes to tell you how little they actually pay attention to what's happening on the ground.
We don't know. I'm talking about when the rubber meets the road. I'm talking about, for example, Kansas City, 30,000 government employees might be laid off. It will destroy the economy of Kansas City. That's okay.
Why do you say that?
Because I'm reading what the individuals from Kansas City have been saying, that they're very concerned.
What do you think they're going to say when they're going to get whacked?
Of course they're going to say that. But my point is, do we think that's smart to live in an American city just go under?
How many American cities need a massively oversized federal government to stay afloat. I mean, isn't that says more about the city than the government?
But when did we get to the point?
We're going under, boys. Take shelter.
We ain't got no brand.
Oh, my gosh. Look at it. The water is rising all around us. We're sinking. Oh, my gosh. First off, the numbers were only off by about 32,884. Instead of 30,000 layoffs, we had 116 at the IRS. And even if there's 1,000 out of 6,000, that's an 18% cut. It's not ideal, but guess what? Those are the cuts that are going to happen to get this federal government back under control and back to being an efficient operation. I'm sorry, that's what has to happen. But to hear people on CNN going nuts about how 30,000 people are getting laid off in Kansas City, and oh my goodness, how are we all going to survive? And is it good to sink an American city? Listen, there's one city that will sink if the federal government bloat does get cut, and that's Washington, D.C. And that is a city that is built on your taxpayer dollars, that is basically just doing the bidding of the Democratic Party. They voted for Kamala Harris 92-8 in the last election. 92-8, John.
I'm wondering if Canada would be interested. Tell you what, here's what we got a deal for you.
Oh, that's great. Oh, my goodness. But this is how you build a story out, right? You start with some absurd number. 30,000 people in Kansas City are getting let go. Then it comes down to 1,000. And then the facts come in at 116, at least for now. But no one actually knows what the real number is when all is said and done. They just know the hysteria of what they think happened based on some big, scary headlines that they saw.
Similar to headlines about how many unarmed black people are shot by police.
Yeah, that's true. The real number, is anywhere from 10 to 20 a year. And listen, it's 10 to 20 too many, assuming it's a situation where people aren't putting cops in a bad spot. But you poll people on this, and they think it's like 1,000, and it's just not true.
Yeah, so maybe 200 people here is certainly a long way from 30,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty good distance from 1,000.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, literally, you had every media outlet in this town saying 1,000 people are getting let go. It was 100. I'm kind of disappointed, to be honest. Not that I want to see people lose their jobs, but if it only ends up being 100 out of 6,000, I'm not convinced they're doing the downsizing they actually need to be doing. And once again, two things can be true at once here. I can be sympathetic and empathetic for anyone who loses a job, but also understand that downsizing needs to happen, and it has to happen in a way that actually reduces your deficit in a meaningful way. It can't just be all smoke and mirrors where it looks good for Elon on X and it makes Trump look good when they're not actually cutting. I think they will. I think that time will come. But in the meantime, you've got the hysterics here in Kansas City. You got, last week, Emmanuel Cleaver was going nuts.
You mustard move.
I haven't used it yet this morning, so I had to. We were 3 hours and 10 minutes into the show, and now it's an obligation to drop that at least once a show for the foreseeable future, whether you like it or not. Cleaver's going nuts. You've got Sharice Davids over the weekend talking about this with our buddy John Holt, and she said this about DOGE.
How do you find that middle ground in what Elon Musk is trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there that at the end of the day, I do think that on both sides of the aisle, and certainly from my perspective, addressing issues of fraud, addressing issues of waste, and trying to improve federal efficiency is a huge priority. And for this, and particularly USAID, I think that we're probably talking about disagreements in how we get there. I can tell you that because USAID is an agency that makes use of and helps Kansas farmers get the food that they grow, not just to feed us here at home, but to feed people internationally, that the approach that we have seen around USAID right now is just not a responsible way to get to more efficient and effective program, whether it's USAID or some of the other areas that we're seeing this.
That was a lot of nothing from Sharice Davids, but that is nothing new for those who have been listening to those conversations for the better part of 6 years now. If Sharice Davids and the leadership in her party was smart, they would be saying to Donald Trump, you know what, we want to work with you. We agree. It's long overdue for us to start finding the waste and the fraud and the abuse. We know that may cost some people their jobs, but they would be better off trying to manage something and trying to help along the way instead of screaming bloody murder. That actually would make more political sense for them, and it would make them appear more moderate, even if it's not their objective deep down, even if they're just trying to limit the amount of cutting that gets done. They can appear to be coming back to the middle, even if they don't believe it. It's kind of like, if you're going to build a new house, right? And your spouse is like, you know what, I'll take care of everything. And you're like, I don't know if I trust her with the budget. Or him. I'm not assuming gender in any of this. It's not the point. I'm not sure I trust him on the budget. Let me make sure that I'm overseeing some stuff here. You offer to be a part of it. That way you get some of what you want. That's what they should be doing right now. Instead, they're just holding bizarre rallies outside of buildings that no one could name in a million years, screaming random things at the clouds.
You mustard moo moo moo.
And in the meantime, we keep getting the content for it.